Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. This has been a great series. We've been doing these seminars, online seminars, all month, and we've gotten really good feedback from them. So we've been adding material as we go along, trying to get all of your questions answered. But I really want to thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Amber from Mayan Riviera Properties here in Puerto Morelos, Mexico. You'll find out a little bit more about me in just a few minutes. But for those of you who have never been into an online meeting like this one, I just want to kind of familiarize you with the options that you have available. On that sort of control panel, there's a chat box. And you have the option of chatting with me as well as the others in the meeting through that chat box. Now, while I'm doing the seminar, I'm not always able to monitor that box, but I certainly will review it at the end. And at the end of the slides that I have in the workshop, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions and answers with you. So feel free to either have any questions ready for me at the end, or as we go along and you have a question, if you want to throw it into that chat box, when we get to the question and answer session, I'll go back and see if there's any posts that I need to address before we move on to the general question and answer session. I just want to make sure, and just so that you also can familiarize yourself with that chat box, I want to make sure everybody can hear me okay. Is everybody able to hear me? If you are, would you mind just confirming with me in that chat box, and we'll go ahead and get started. Perfect. I've got go-aheads that everybody is able to hear me, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let's see here. My slides aren't wanting to move. There we go. Okay. Well, tonight I want to encourage you to, as you can see, you can't have margaritas by the pool in February with your savings account. Just a little humor to start out the night. But what I really want you to think of is consider your vacation home as another investment in a diversified investment portfolio that you have. In other words, you might, very well have savings accounts or stocks and bonds and annuities, but you're not going to get personal enjoyment out of them like you are a second home. But really consider your second home an investment, and we're going to talk about the investment potential tonight, but that's really what it is. And one of the great things about investments, second homes as investments, is that you do get that personal enjoyment out of them rather than sitting over them watching and worrying about what they're going to do. The second point that I want to make as we get started tonight, that all the photos that I have in these slides are from Puerto Morelos. So if you're not familiar with Puerto Morelos, all the pictures tonight on these slides are from here, where I call home. We established Mayan Riviera Properties in 2005, and we specialize in Puerto Morelos, Mexico. We do three things at our office. We do sales, vacation rentals, and property management. We're also federally certified by CONOCER. CONOCER is the Federal Association of the federal association that certifies us realtors, and so that's optional, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but I do have that federal certification. And we're also members of AMPI, as well as international members of NAR. AMPI is that icon that you see there on the left-hand side, and that's our National Association of Realtors here in Mexico. And then, of course, that center realtor logo, I'm an international member of NAR, and that's NAR's icon there. That is the Realtor Association in the U.S. A little bit about me. I'm originally from Michigan, and I graduated from Michigan State University. My background is in animal science. I have a degree in animal science, equine nutrition, so not exactly my area of focus now, but I'm a horse girl. I'm married with 2 children, and I began visiting Puerto Morelos in 1998 and started living full-time in Puerto Morelos in 2004. I'm the co-owner and broker of Mayan Riviera Properties. We actually have 2 sales agents now, myself, and then Kim Temple joined us in last fall, I guess now. Gosh, it's been by quick. Kim joined us, and she is a former attorney from the state of Colorado, and she's been a great asset. And so if you stop into the office about sales, you'll either meet myself or Kim. I've included this personal information here, 1, so that you get to know me, but 2, so that you know that, in living here between kids and being married and having clients and all of that stuff, we've encountered lots of different issues, and I have lots of experience. And so, part of this workshop series is to familiarize you with living in Mexico, and even if you are maybe already living here, if you have any questions about living here in general, please don't hesitate to ask me. I'm always happy to try to answer them if I can. The topics that we want to cover tonight are on this slide, and I hope that by the end of the night you'll be fairly well prepared to decide whether you want to invest, live, or work in Mexico. So as you see those topics there, those are definitely the things that we're going to be touching on. But again, if you have any questions, please keep note of them along the way. And even if it's not a topic that we're covering, I'm certainly happy to try to address it if I can. The first topic is, the investment potential of Mexico, and I tried to make these slides in this seminar general to Mexico, because maybe you aren't interested in Puerto Morelos specifically, and we'll talk about, there might be a few differences here and there, but for the most part, all this information applies throughout the country. These next, this slide here, and actually, I guess it would just be for this slide, I had to use 2011 numbers. I used 2011 numbers because when I created these slides at the beginning of the month, the data for December of 2012 had not yet been released. And so because I didn't have a complete year's data to show, I went ahead and used 2011 numbers. But 2012 was on track to surpass 2011 and surpass it by a bit. So, but I think 2011 is still a pretty good one to use. It was pretty similar. In 2011, there were 23.4 million international tourists in Mexico. Now, that doesn't include of course, the domestic national tourists, the Mexicans that tour in their own country, but international tourists, 23.4 million. And of those, 5.7 million were from the U.S. and 1.5 million were from Canada. I saw in the registration that most of you are either from the U.S. or Canada, and so and that's been sort of typical of these workshops. And so I thought I'd include those 2 figures for you, just sort of interest. The other thing is that of those 23.4 million that came into Mexico in 2011, a little over 6 million came into Cancun specifically. And when the tourists come into Cancun, they're either visiting Cancun most likely or the Riviera Maya, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. One of the things that I always want to impress upon people when they're thinking about investing, particularly in Puerto Morelos, we're really affordable when you compare us to the real estate prices and the property tax rates elsewhere. I have lots of clients that were considering places in maybe British Columbia or Phoenix or California or Hawaii or maybe even Florida. And I would encourage you not only to look at the prices, but also to look at the property tax rates, and you'll find that we, in general, are more attractive in both regards. In Puerto Morelos, to give you an idea if you're not familiar with Puerto Morelos real estate, Puerto Morelos oceanfront condos start at $275,000 as a general rule of thumb, and will range from $275,000 to $600,000 for the high-end luxury units. Homes in town, homes start at $250,000 and go up from there. There's always a premium to be on the water, and most oceanfront homes are pretty big, so you'll find oceanfront homes somewhere in the range of $700,000 to $1 million. Some are even more than that. But those are big for 4 or 5 bedroom homes, guest houses, etc. They get pretty big. The neat thing about Puerto Morelos is that, unlike Florida where you might be a 5-minute drive to the beach or something like that, all property is practically beachfront in Puerto Morelos. We are 3 streets deep, which means that even if you're on the back street, you're only 2 blocks to the beach. So everything is nice and close. And our property tax rates are extremely reasonable. We have a 0.26% tax rate on residential properties. And so I gave you an example there. If you bought a place for $500,000, your property taxes are going to be about $1,300. That's USD, but very, very reasonable and much less than what you would pay for that property in most other vacation locations. Investment. I think that, my husband started an investment group here, and we searched all over, and we picked Puerto Morelos specifically for our investments, and for several reasons. And part of them are on this slide, and part of them, when we get to Puerto Morelos specifically, go into a little bit more of that. But in general, Mexico has proven to be an excellent investment because of one big reason. Through all this sort of economic upheaval, our prices have been pretty darn stable when you consider what's happened in other second home, other markets, but particularly in second home markets. Mexico does not have any mortgages, and that had a huge positive impact in that if you bought a place, let's say a condo or even a house, but let's use the condo as the example. If you bought a condo, you don't have a foreclosure within your building where the bank's selling it for half of what you purchased your place for. That means automatically your value of your place is just going to plummet. That doesn't happen here because properties, as we'll talk about in a bit, are basically purchased in cash here in Mexico. And so because those are cash assets and because the banks aren't liquidating them, our prices have been relatively stable. People have asked me kind of what the market has done. I can speak specifically here in Puerto Morelos. We're probably about 20% off of our highest of high, but after that, things have kind of flattened out. It's not really on the upswing yet, but for the last few years, we've been holding steady with prices, and they've really stabilized and are very, very fair for what you're able to get. These properties are rentable. I put 16 to 20 weeks a year. I think that's a good, probably albeit conservative on the 16-week side, but a good estimate of what you can expect. Having a beach condo is like having a ski condo. There's a season for it, and that season is Christmas through Easter. So depending on how much time you might be here during that period would probably dictate how much time might be allowed for some vacation rental income. But your vacation rentals are a great supplement. They can cover your maintenance costs on your property. They can cover your property taxes. I even have clients that just go away for a couple of weeks over Christmas and New Year's, spend the rest of the winter here, and those couple of weeks basically pay all the overhead for their condo. So it's a great option. Not something that might cover if you're having to make payments on this property because you maybe took out a second mortgage or something. I'm always honest with people. I'm never going to tell you that it's going to rent 40 weeks a year and you're going to be generating $100,000 off your unit. That's probably not going to happen. But what is going to happen is you're going to have some, it's a great potential for some extra cash flow to help cover your costs. Canadians. If there's any Canadians in the crowd tonight, which I believe that there are based on the information that you gave me on your registration, if you're thinking about investing in the U.S., you've probably heard that there is some disadvantages to investing in the U.S. Even though I probably hail from there, I have to say our tax laws right now are really prohibitive for Canadians that want to invest there. Basically, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, there's sort of I don't know if I'd call it a loophole, but I don't think it was an intended consequence in our tax law right now that says if a Canadian or another foreigner is to purchase in the U.S. and that investment value is, I can't remember, over $200,000 or $300,000, basically if they were to pass away, the entire estate, not just the asset in the U.S., but their entire estate, be it in Canada or elsewhere, is taxable in the U.S. With estate taxes. And so because of that, there's a lot of Canadians that are really reconsidering purchasing in the U.S., and certainly Mexico doesn't have that estate tax issue. Another fun perk, which I think is often overlooked, not only by people that are thinking about buying here, but people that already own here, is that you're able to swap your house. If you own in the Mayan Riviera or any other probably popular location place in Mexico, there's so many people that want to travel here. If you own here, you will be able to swap your house with other vacation home owners and travel anywhere in the world that you would like to go. I have clients that stayed in Paris and in Rome. There's all sorts of websites, homeswap.com and iTravix and things that have been developed for people that have these properties that want to swap. But it's certainly a great perk to owning, and one that some people really don't take enough advantage of, I don't think. I put this slide up here. I think probably if you found this seminar, you probably know where Puerto Morelos and the Riviera Maya is, but I'm always surprised when I sit on the plane. I talk to people and I ask where they're going on vacation, and they tell me they're going to the Riviera Maya, and they think it's a city. So I put it up here so that if you don't know, I am going to tell you what the Riviera Maya is. We are a coastline on Mexico, not a particular city. You can see that map of Mexico there where the yellow dot is. That dot is in the northeastern corner of the Yucatan Peninsula. And that close-up shot there will show you where Cancun is, and then Puerto Morelos, which is the yellow dot. Then a bit further down the coast, you get to Playa del Carmen. And then further down the coast yet, you'll get to Tulum. And so that whole coastline from Cancun to Tulum is what is the Mayan Riviera. And Puerto Morelos, we're that first stop along the coast. I put this slide up as well. I recently did a seminar in Grand Prairie, Alberta, and there were lots of people there who had vacationed in Yuma, Arizona. And I wanted to put this up here because they could not believe how much warmer we are than Arizona. And so, we have great, great weather here. Those orange dots are the average highs through the year. Of course, these are in Celsius. The blue dots are our average lows, and sometimes averages can be misleading. If you have the low temp of 10 and the high temp of 30, your average is 20, and 20 isn't real representative of what you could find on an average day. But in this particular case where we're at, that really isn't accurate. Our averages are really, really close to what the weather is. We don't really have a whole lot of variation, and so these averages are a pretty true reflection of what you can expect every day. While you're here through the winter or the summer months. It's pretty temperate. It gets humid in the summer, but it doesn't get as hot as it does in other locations, and our winters are much, much warmer typically. The next three slides, I'm not going to read through all of them, but the next three slides are direct flights, nonstop flights from these various cities. The first one is Canada, the next one's going to be the U.S., and the third is from, worldwide. But these are direct flights into Cancun and the number of hours flight time. And the point of these slides is that, not only do you have easy airlift from wherever you are, which is certainly convenient to get down. I'm from Detroit, and I get here in about 3 hours, about 3.5 hours, I guess. But not only, is it convenient for yourselves, but it's also a convenient place for everyone else. And because of that, when you're thinking about an investment, when you can get to Cancun from literally anywhere in the world, so many major cities nonstop, it makes it that much more appealing as an investment because you have a worldwide market. That is interested in that product, not just something that a limited amount of people can get to. The other nice thing about Puerto Morelos specifically is that we're just 15 minutes from the Cancun airport. We're actually closer to the Cancun airport than Cancun is. So, you grab your stuff and you head down the highway and you're here in just a few minutes. Again, I don't want to just focus on Puerto Morelos because I think that there's probably people in here that are interested in elsewhere in Mexico, so I've just got a few slides. If you're not familiar with Puerto Morelos, I would be remiss not to at least mention it and give you a little bit of information about it. Again, we're just 15 minutes south of the Cancun airport. I mentioned that Riviera Maya coastline. Every town along that coast is different, and I encourage people, if you're thinking about investing on this coast, to go see each of those towns because one is going to appeal to you. But our niche is that we're the most authentic Mexican town on the coast. and we have a national park out in front of us. About 500 meters from shore is the reef. That's the Mesoamerican Reef. It's the largest reef chain, second largest reef chain in the world, largest reef chain in this hemisphere. And it's at one of its shallowest points right out here in front of Puerto Morelos. And so because of that, our waters are very, very calm in Puerto Morelos because that reef blocks all the big waves. So lots of families and lots of, grandparents with grandchildren that are going to visit really like these waters because they can bring their kids here, they can sit them down at the ocean's edge, they can play, and they're not going to get crashed over in big waves. The other thing is that, if you're a snorkeler, or you're a kayaker, or you're a swimmer, our waters are very, very calm, and so it's very, very good swimming. Those waters are also protected because it is a national park. And so because of that, because it's a national park, there's restricted boat activity. There is no jet skiing or parasailing or anything like that, fishing within the reef, from the reef to the shore. So it makes it really, really great for all those water activities. The other thing about town is that we're surrounded by mangroves, which are protected. And so what Puerto Morelos becomes is this sort of exclusive enclave of residential property in this little bitty authentic fishing village. We have a full-size marina at the south end of town, which can hold any size boat that you desire. And it has created this, again, this enclave of homes, and people purchase here knowing that it's never going to become the size of Playa del Carmen. And so the values, the residential real estate values here are very, very good. They're some of the best on the coast. For those of you that aren't familiar with Puerto Morelos, that lighthouse in the picture is our town icon. That is our leaning lighthouse. It tipped toward one side in Hurricane Beulah back in the 60s, and it's remained that way ever since. But if you see pictures of Puerto, you'll often see that lighthouse. For whatever reason, sometimes these slides just do not want to cooperate. Move. There we go. Puerto Morelos, it is a very active, people ask me what it's like to live here, and I would say that I can speak for Puerto Morelos, but I know a lot of other communities are the same. And if you're thinking about somewhere else than Puerto Morelos, I would certainly encourage you to check out what the local expat and local community is doing as far as activities go. Puerto Morelos is very, very active. We have international fishing tournaments. Those sport fishing tournaments for marlin and sailfish, those happen in the summer months. We have lots of festivals. We're going to have a movie festival coming up. We've had a music festival. We have, carnivals. There's all sorts of things that go on. Our Casa de la Cultura, which can be found all over Mexico, but we have a really, really good one here in town. It's like a community center. They put on all sorts of dance events. You can take classes in yoga and Pilates and languages and arts and crafts and just, all sorts of amazing stuff, in addition to all the cultural events that they bring to town. We have a newly formed Rotary Club. There are charity groups, be it if you want to volunteer to help some of the schools and local humanitarian efforts, or if you're an animal person, there are dog and cat rescues as well. There's a group that goes golfing every week. There are book clubs. I mean, it just kind of goes on and on and on. The other thing is that language isn't an obstacle. I certainly encourage people to learn Spanish if you're going to be down here. But if you don't speak Spanish, come down. There's enough people that speak English or speak a little bit of English to get you by until you learn. So don't see language or the lack of Spanish as an obstacle to you coming down. The other thing is that this area isn't what it used to be, and we don't really rough it anymore. Cancun has Costco and Sam's Club and Walmart and Home Depot, and some of us who have been here long enough remember the days when those weren't here, but those are all here now and make living here a lot more convenient. Puerto Morelos is also located halfway between Cancun to its north and Playa del Carmen to its south. And although we have lots and lots of great restaurants and activities here, there are many more to the north and south of us, just 20 to 30 minutes on either side. And so, you can also take advantage of that, but you don't have to live in the congestion. Last slide about Puerto. People ask what we do here. Some people call it Puerto Muerto because it tends to be a pretty quiet town, but those who think it's Muerto probably haven't been here through the wintertime. We've got lots of stuff going on. Our beach has won lots of awards, but I've happened to list the latest. We were voted in the top 10 Mexican beaches in 2013 by TripAdvisor. We have Mayan ruins and culture in the area. You're within, I guess, most of them are within an hour, but at least 2 hours for Chichen Itza to 4 major ruin sites. Golf. If you're a golfer, we have TPC courses. The only TPC course built outside of the United States is right here, about 10 minutes north of us on the highway. There's a PGA course. If you've seen the Mayakoba Classic, they're actually moving it from February to the fall. I think it's going to be in November this year. But the Mayakoba Classic is held at the Mayakoba Chameleon Golf Course, just 10 minutes to our south. And there are lots of other golf courses that have been designed by award-winning, designers, Jack Nicklaus and Nick Price, all sorts of stuff. I mentioned this a little bit, but the snorkeling, diving, and kayaking in Puerto Morelos' national park waters is pretty much unparalleled on the coast. We are the mecca of snorkeling, aside from, a few select locations maybe in the Caribbean, and definitely you'd have to go to Australia's Great Barrier Reef to see a larger reef than what we have here. Boating and fishing. If you're a boat person, we have that full-size marina. In typical Puerto Morelos style, our marina has anything from little bitty local fishing pongas to giant sport yachts parked next to each other, which is part of why I love Puerto. Everybody mixes quite well. We have those ocean sport fishing tournaments. People come in from all over to do those. And then there's also fly fishing and spin fishing in the area for tarpon and snook and bonefish. So if you're interested in those, they're around. My husband is a huge fisherman, and if you have questions about that, I'd be happy to share his email. He'd be happy to talk to anybody about fishing. And this was important for us when we moved. We're foodies, and good food is important. Puerto Morelos, believe it or not, has over 20 restaurants. I would say easily double that, but if you want to include all the taco stands and local places as well. And we have food from all over, and it's fantastic. We have Argentinian, we have Mexican, we have Yucatecan, we have Uruguayan, we have all the seafood you could want. We have a fresh fish market that our fishermen co-op bring fresh fish and lobster and shrimp into every day so you can purchase it. We have fruit and vegetable markets. We have a guy that drives around in a truck dropping off fruit and vegetables at your door. We have, those fruit and vegetable markets make fresh squeezed juices. For 10 pesos, you can get a whole liter of fresh orange juice or fresh squeezed grapefruit juice. Unbelievable, just from the tacos to the first-class dining establishments that are in town. The food is really, really, really good. That's all I have on Puerto Morelos, and the rest of it that we're going to talk about is more applicable to the rest of Mexico. And I wanted to cover, not only purchasing and investing in Mexico, but also, the ins and outs of kind of living here and working here. So these first few slides are going to touch on owning in Mexico. And one of the things that people need to understand when they talk about owning in Mexico is that if you had asked somebody, or maybe if you search on the internet, can I own property in Mexico? But certainly if you ask somebody, if you asked 5 different people, I would be willing to bet that you would get 5 different answers. There's a lot of misinformation and a lot of false assumptions that people have. And so part of the reason we started these workshop series, we had started them in our office. We do a workshop every Tuesday night in our office, so you're welcome to stop in and take it if you'd ever like to. But we extended it to the online version this year, is because there is so much misinformation that we wanted to promote the right information to people and give them a reputable source on where to find it. If you are thinking about investing in Mexico, one of the things you need to understand is that Mexico has a restricted zone. And I kind of think, just from personal experience as an anecdote, that I think the restricted zone is what has been misinterpreted into the variations that you hear people discuss as far as whether or not you can own in Mexico. I think this restricted zone idea is what really throws them for a loop. But let me talk about it. What the restricted zone is it is a ring around Mexico, which you can see in that picture. The red is the coastal borders, and the yellow is the international land borders. And the restricted zone is 100 kilometers from any land border and 50 kilometers from any ocean border. Okay, so it forms this uneven ring around the country. Now, to understand why the restricted zone exists, and so that we kind of have a basis for our understanding. I'm going to give you a little bit of historical perspective. Before the Mexican Revolution, Mexico was occupied, about 98% of the country actually was occupied by Spain, okay? And Spain had monopolized the assets in the country, the mines, the people. They had set up these huge haciendas, and the people basically, most of the Mexican people were living as basically feudal serfs on these haciendas. They were being paid with not money, but with like tokens that they could use in the hacienda stores, et cetera, et cetera. And so the population of Mexico got pretty sick and tired of being occupied by a foreign country and in the poor living conditions that they were in. So they decided to revolt and kick out Spain, which is what they did. And through a series of different events, it basically culminated in them forming their first constitution. And this happened right around 1900. And when they did this, now imagine that, Spain has occupied 98% of your country. You have just fought a very, very long war getting rid of them. You were definitely the underdogs, but you had population on your side. Very, very long and bloody war. You're setting up your constitution. Spain is already trying to infiltrate your borders to get back some of their lands and people. This thing isn't all said and done. And so when they created the Constitution in Mexico, they considered it a critical matter of national security to set up the restricted zone. And at the time, they prevented foreign ownership within that zone because they were really, what it was they were afraid Spain was going to come back in, buy pieces of land along their borders and bring back in artillery and people and try to take back some of those assets that they had. That was originally why the restricted zone was established. And it was also why, this is sort of an aside, at that time, when they were creating this system, land in Mexico is not public record land ownership. In other words, if you go to the county clerk in the U.S. or Canada, and I would sure in a lot of other countries, it's a matter of public record about who owns the lot, how much they paid for it, et cetera, et cetera. In Mexico, that is not public information. And that goes back to them being concerned about people coming in, finding out who had their plantation, and going after them. And so it's created this private system of land ownership as well. But anyway, so in the restricted zone, there was no foreign ownership. Well, that was back in 1900. There's a lot that has changed in Mexico since 1900, and they've obviously warmed up significantly to foreign investment. Bring in tourism, the advent of all these archaeological finds, airplanes, tourists in general, et cetera, et cetera. They obviously, things have, the environment in which all this is going on has changed significantly. So through a culmination of congressional acts, et cetera, by about the mid-1990s, they had this figured out. They have this constitutional clause about the restricted zone. So what they've done is they have said that any foreigners that purchase in the restricted zone will own the real estate, their real estate, in a trust called a fideicomiso. And I've put that word there, fideicomiso, so that you could see it and you knew what it was in case you find it anywhere else. That is basically your trust in which you own your property if it is located within the restricted zone. Okay? Now, let's talk about this fideicomiso. So the fideicomiso works exactly the same way as an asset trust would in the U.S. or Canada. Those of us in the U.S. are a little bit more familiar with asset trusts than the Canadians, from what I understand. Canadians do have them, but don't use them as frequently as the U.S. citizens do. But most people understand the idea that if you, let's say, have assets as a family, and you put it in the, if we had one, a Schultz family trust, so that the property goes into the trust or the assets go into the trust, and you become a beneficiary of the trust. It's exactly the same thing, okay? The only difference is that in Mexico, the people that are able to administrate the trust, the only people that are able to do that is a federally authorized bank. Okay, now it might be a little bit different in the U.S. and Canada, but here in Mexico, those federally authorized banks serve as your trust holder. Okay, now you as a person, in other words, I, Amber Pierce Schultz, or me and my spouse, Joshua Schultz, can be the primary beneficiaries of that trust. Or if I had an LLC in the U.S., Amber Schultz LLC, my LLC could be the beneficiary of the trust. I mention that because some U.S. citizens, from what I understand, Canadians, it really doesn't matter, but some U.S. citizens find there are some tax advantages in the U.S. to doing that. So that's why I mentioned that. You'd have to check with your accountant to see whether, your situation would, and in your situation, whether that would be advantageous or not. But the important thing is that primary beneficiaries, in other words, my husband and I, if we're the trust holders, or the beneficiaries of the trust, the bank would be my trust holder, we can appoint secondary beneficiaries. So oftentimes, if it's a married couple, it'll say, if anything should ever happen to me, the property will go to my husband. If anything should happen to my husband, vice versa. But if anything should ever happen to the both of us, we want the property distributed to our heirs, named, heir 1, 2, or 3, and in the following percentages, okay? The trust has a 50-year term, so every 50 years you can renew it, but it can be renewed into perpetuity. So it's not that in 50 years the land goes back to the government. That's not the case. Your trust is renewable in, an infinite number of times into perpetuity. The other thing that I want to mention, there are two kind of asides. One is mentioned here. If you see ejido, okay, ejido properties are similar to what Canadians might know as crown land, like that. Americans sort of similar to a native reserve, a native reservation, not quite. But in that, foreigners cannot own ejido properties. And so if you are looking around Mexico and you happen upon a ejido property is not titled. It is Mexican government land in which it's given possession rights to Mexican people to use, but it is not able to be owned by a foreigner, okay? But any other property, whether it be in the restricted zone or whether it be in the interior of the country, if you're thinking about purchasing in places like Mexico City or San Miguel de Allende or Puebla or something like that as a foreigner, you're outside of that restricted zone, so your property does not have to go into trust, okay? You can own it in a fee simple deed. Now, the only exception to that would be if the property is ejido. And please note that no matter what anybody says, foreigners cannot own ejido, okay? If you'd like to get into that, and if you have questions about that, I'm happy to answer it. But the simple answer is foreigners cannot own ejido properties. Now, when we talk about the trust, okay, and going back to something I just mentioned, if you're outside of the restricted zone, in other words, if you're purchasing in the interior of the country, you don't need to put your property in a trust. Okay, but what I'm here to tell you is that if you're considering purchasing a property that is outside of your home country, in other words, if I'm a U.S. citizen, anything outside of the U.S. that I ever purchase will be put, more than likely, into a trust. Okay, if you're Canadian, anything you purchase outside of Canada, you should really consider putting into a trust. Whether, if you're thinking about Mexico specifically, whether it's in the restricted zone or whether, excuse me, it's not. If you want to buy in Mexico City, I would still recommend you put the property into a trust, even though it doesn't happen to be required. If you're thinking about buying in Costa Rica, excuse me, I would recommend you put the property in the trust. Why is because foreign countries have no obligation to honor any foreign wills, okay? So if anything should ever happen to you, a document that you created back in Canada or the U.S. has no legal jurisdiction in a foreign country. And so what you don't want to happen is you do not want your property to end up in probate should you die. So a trust creates a legally recognized entity within that country and specifically designates the secondary beneficiaries, the heirs. And for that reason, I would highly suggest that no matter where you purchase outside of your home country, you look to see if a trust is an option so that that establishes that chain of inheritance for you and the property doesn't end up somewhere in a probate mess should you pass away. All right, so we've explained the trust. Then usually what the next thing people ask me is that investment secure? I get how it works. Well, is it safe? I'm here to tell you that it is, okay? Number one, we can use escrow accounts. Those escrow accounts are in the United States through licensed bonded escrow agents. for your purchase. In other words, you don't need to put your money at risk by sending funds directly to a seller, okay, prior to title transfer. You can put those funds into an escrow account. That's one level of security as far as the transaction goes. Level 2, both First American and Stewart Title, the largest title insurance companies in the United States, offer title insurance policies on your fideicomisos. Okay, I'm going to use that word fideicomisos, but remember that is the bank trust. So if you purchase, it is not obligatory, obviously. It's a product that we have brought with us, but it is available. You can purchase title insurance. Title insurance says that if anyone should ever bring up an issue and where your title is in jeopardy because of a survey error or because somebody didn't say, you know, somebody wasn't who they said they were or something, and someone challenges the title of the property, title insurance will, number one, pay to defend it, and should you lose that court case, then they will reimburse you your policy premium. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about why it's not a necessary product here in Mexico, but if it's going to keep you awake at night, if you need that extra layer of security in your investment, it's fairly reasonably priced, it's a one-time purchase at close, and it is available. The other thing is that even if you don't take the title insurance, it does speak to the legitimacy of the process. The two largest title insurance companies in the United States will insure a fideicomiso. People then ask, you know, what happens? These fideicomisos are managed by banks. What happens, let's say, like in the U.S., what happens if that bank should go under? Is my fideicomiso in jeopardy? The answer is no, okay? Fideicomisos are not considered assets of the bank. And so these banks aren't leveraging them. You know, if they were to make stupid investments, they're not putting your fideicomiso investment in jeopardy. The other thing is that if they were to close, it would your fideicomiso would simply transfer to another federally authorized bank. So the vitality of the bank itself has no bearing on the security of your investment. Okay? The other thing is that if you are a citizen of the U.S. or Canada, we also enjoy the NAFTA treaty, okay, our three countries, Mexico, the U.S., and Canada. And so you also have a layer of protection there where these three countries agree to and have the obligation to honor the contracts and treaties and things like trusts between the three countries. Here we go with my slides that don't want to move. Give me just a moment here to get it going. Okay. What are my financing options? Once you decide to buy, an important consideration to make is financing, because in Mexico there is no financing. The exceptions to that would be two exceptions. Number one, owner financing, or two, developer financing. Let me talk really quickly about those two options. Owner financing would be you want to purchase a private home that's owned by an owner, and the two parties set up some sort of payment arrangement, and then at the end of that payment period, once the property's been paid for in full, the property would be titled into the name of the purchaser. Now, I'm here to tell you that there are special laws in Mexico that make it very, very difficult and frankly not recommendable for owners to do what we would know in the U.S. as a land contract, where owner puts X amount down, or seller, sorry, the buyer would put X amount down, move into the house, continue to make payments to the owner, and when it's paid off, the title would transfer into the buyer's name. Unfortunately, in Mexico, that's really not possible or recommendable. But what will work sometimes in some circumstances is maybe it's more, rather than owner financing, it's more like a delayed closing, where maybe you like a property, you can put a certain amount down. Over the next year, you're going to make payments to the owner, and when you've paid for it in full, the property will close, and you, the buyer, can move into the property at the time of closing. Okay? In other words, in these options, the buyer isn't taking possession of the property until after closing. Okay? The other option is developer financing. Those are typically on brand new units. A developer might offer some financing. Typically, it's going to be a little bit higher interest rate than what you're going to pay at home. Oftentimes, it's 6 to 8 to 9 to 10%, and they're short-term loans. Sometimes they're interest only for a couple of years, but then you have a big balloon payment coming. So those are some options there. What most people usually do is they're going to have financing options from their home country. Okay? Now, important. I don't know of any U.S. or Canadian bank that will allow you to use your Mexican property as the collateral for the loan. You've got to do something else. So people use home equity loans. Sometimes they just have credit lines. If you own another property outright, you could take a loan against it. U.S. citizens are able to use self-directed IRA funds to buy international properties. So just keep that in mind. There's some different options for you there. But basically, when you come to Mexico, it's a cash sale. So when people ask me all the time, well, if I pay in cash, will I get a better price? Well, not necessarily, because everybody pays in cash here. So just keep that in mind. Top 10 buying tips for buying in Mexico. Again, these aren't specific to the restricted zone properties or anything like this. This is anywhere you want to buy here. Number 1, really work on narrowing your focus. If you do, your search will be a lot less frustrating and a lot less arduous, okay? Really focus in on what is my budget. Okay, we've talked about the fact that there is no financing here. So find out how much you can get from your bank, okay? Really narrow in on your budget. Once you know your budget, how much space do you really need, okay? What size? I always include this because a lot of retirees think they need a lot more space than what they end up needing. And when I say that, it's because sometimes they'll think that, maybe kids are coming down and they want room for the whole family and et cetera, et cetera. If you want to do that and it's within your budget, great, okay? I'm happy to sell you a huge, huge home for all of your family, all right? But if that isn't within your budget, really think about how much space you're going to need. If your kids are only coming down once a year, maybe you only need a 1-bedroom condo. And then, if you're within a condominium association, most condo owners work together. Hey, if you let me use your place for a week, you can use my place for a week, because everybody's got family that comes down. Or, worst case scenario, maybe you rent a place for a week within your condo unit from one of your neighbors. Either way, it's going to be probably less expensive in the long run, lots less expensive than it is buying a big 3-bedroom place for that odd time when the kids want to come down, okay? So keep that in mind because it does relate to your budget. Again, is oceanfront a must? If oceanfront's a must, then let's look at your budget, figure out where we're at, whether we can move you into a condo or whether we can get you into a private house. If it's not a must, you can get a lot more house for your money off the street, or on the street, rather. Condo or private house? People ask me all the time, would you recommend one or the other? Truthfully, there are pros and cons to both. What I think it comes down to is there are some people that are condo people and there are some people that are private house people, okay? Now remember that depending on how much time you're going to be here, maybe you're a private house person at home, but if you're only planning on spending a couple of weeks here, maybe you are a condo person if you're only here a couple of weeks, okay? So think about that. For Puerto Morelos specifically, in town versus out of town, I don't know. You tell me, what kind of privacy do you want? Do you want to be in town where you can walk to the square? There's more people. Some people prefer the privacy and the tranquility of being out of town. I think that's a personal preference. Is income rental a factor? If it is, then let me know so that we can talk about that. Maybe you want to find places that have a rental history. I can tell you that places in Puerto Morelos that are off the water, unless it's an Uber budget rental, your place off the water will need a pool, okay, if you want it to be rentable. So if it is a factor, then we need to find, it is a factor and you're looking at properties off the water, then let's make sure we look at properties that have a pool or have the space to put one in, okay? If it's not, and you're not a big pool person, then we can eliminate some of those choices. So it's just about narrowing down to find out. If you answer these questions and you let me know what those answers are, we can really, really find you a great property. Again, before you do your shopping, find out what your budget is. Kim and I run into this every season where people assume that they're going to be able to get more money out of their house maybe when they get home than what they are. And so maybe they think they're in the $500,000 range for something because they really haven't talked to the bank. And I go show you properties for $500,000. Then you get back and talk to your bank and really you're more maybe at a $350,000 or $400,000 price range. Again, nothing wrong with that, but the problem is that now that I've walked you through properties that are, a good 30% more, even more sometimes, than what you're able to afford, none of those other properties are going to, they're going to kind of pale in comparison. You're going to be disappointed. So if my most successful sales and happiest people come from people that know exactly what's within their means, and we go out and find them the best, because there are really good properties in every price point, okay? But obviously a house for $500,000 isn't going to compare to a house for $250,000, okay? But there are really great properties in both, and so the most success we have in sales is when people really know what their budgets are. When you're thinking about your budgets, plan for about 6 to 8% in closing costs, okay? If you are purchasing something under $500,000, your closing costs are going to be closer to 8%. If you're buying something over $500,000, your costs are going to be more like 6%, because some of those flat fees kind of start dropping out of the percentage equation. So definitely consider that when you're thinking about buying. Number 4 says use the same common sense that would apply to a transaction at home. Now, I tend to believe that I always am preaching to the choir when I have this in the top 10 tips. I also have this list in the workshop that we do here at the office every week. And I think that if you're studious enough to be at my workshops, you're probably not silly enough to do some of the silly things I hear that people do. But I always give this example. There was a guy that came into my office about a year ago and told me, Amber, I need to talk to you after my workshop. And I said, sure. And he said, I think I'm in trouble. And I said, okay. And he said, I bought a place. I said, yep. I paid him in full. Okay. And we haven't closed yet. And I said, excuse me? Now, he had bought this from, this particular person is a foreigner. Okay. And so there was sort of a level of trust there. And he says, I paid him in full. And I said, well, he said, I know, don't even go there. If I were at home, I would never pay somebody in full before we closed. And I said, well, yeah, because, and he said, I know, right? He even knew that he had done something really silly. So my point in this is that we call it margarita fever. I don't know what it is, but use the same common sense that you would apply to a transaction at home. The processes might be different, okay, but the same common sense rules apply. Now, these next tips are ones that I think are really important, and again, 5 and 6 are kind of interconnected. Number 5 is do not open a corporation, a Mexican corporation, if your intent is to own a private residence. You will find evidence and information, I'm going to put information in quotes there, you will find some statements to the contrary on the internet, okay? And that kind of relates to number 6. But the law is very specific. Fideicomisos, these bank trusts, are the way for foreigners to own private property within the restricted zones. Okay? Do not open a Mexican corporation if it is your intent to own a private residence. Now, if you aren't as impressed by that statement because the law tells you to do it, I will hope to impress it upon you that your good financial sense should also tell you not to do it. Because if you put your property into a Mexican corporation, disobeying the law that says do not do that, then you will put yourself into a corporate tax bracket, and you will also force yourself to meet corporate filing obligations. In Mexico, businesses have to file their taxes every 30 days. So you will be paying an accountant about $120 a month to file in zeros for your corporation, which is not a corporation. It owns a private residence. So not only is it illegal, it goes against, the law and the intent of the law, but it also becomes very costly. So the moral of the story is, do not open a corporation if your intent is to own a private residence. Why I said 5 and 6 are related is that be informed. Laws are modernizing in Mexico. Be smart about the information you find online. Okay? Some of it is outdated, and some of it is just plain out wrong and was never correct to begin with. When you start looking for properties and information in Mexico, and as I search, I come across these sites, a lot of them are done by Gringo Bob, who has the best of intentions, but it's sort of his personal pontifications about things and how things work in Mexico. And sometimes Gringo Bob is using information that no longer is current, or is just flat out wrong. And it's not always a Gringo Bob. Sometimes it is other, good sources of information, but maybe it's several years old. And if it's more than several years old, it's probably out of date at this point. So consider your sources, just like anything else on the internet, and make sure that your internet is information is current. Number 7, if you take away one item from this seminar, okay, if you can remember one thing, it is number 7. Do list your property at the full purchase price in your deed, okay? I will tell you that it used to be a practice in Mexico to underreport properties. People would pay X, but they would only report Y. Okay, so maybe they would pay $200,000 for a property, but they would only report in the deed and to the Mexican government that they were paying $100,000. Let me tell you 2 quick reasons why you don't do that. Number 1, it's tax fraud. I would not recommend that you commit tax fraud in your own country, much less a foreign country. Okay, number 1, it's tax fraud. Because it's tax fraud and because the Mexican government has sort of keyed in to this once common practice, they've put the onus on the buyers to do the right thing because they know the seller's long gone and out of the transaction. And so what they say is, buyers, if you purchase a property, the government can come in and do an audit on that property, an estimate, and appraisal, if you will. And if their appraisal, you get a 10% window. If their appraisal comes in any more than 10% different than what you've reported you've paid for the property, buyer, you now owe the capital gains taxes that seller didn't pay because you just got a smoking deal on a property. Okay? Now, that being said, I have never had a property audited here. The law is not so that the government comes in and does these audits on every transaction. The law is there because if they know the property ought to be $500,000 and you come in and report it at $150,000, they have the ability to come in and say because they know that you've underreported and you've committed fraud. Okay, so number 1, it's fraud and they will catch you. Number 2, do list the property at full purchase price, because when you go to sell that property, you probably aren't going to be able to find a buyer that was as foolish as you when you go to sell. And because of that, that buyer is going to want to list the property at full value. Okay? So let's talk about, go back to this example. Let's say you buy a property for $200,000, but you only reported it $100,000. Okay? And about 5 years later, you sell the property for $300,000. Well, you have a capital gains tax. Okay? Instead of your capital gains tax being the difference between $300,000 and $200,000, which paid for the property, it's going to be based on the difference between $300,000 and $100,000, which you reported you paid for the property. Okay? And now you have a huge gain tax based on, and some of it is false gain. In this case, $100,000 of that is false gain because you really paid more, but you can't go back to the government and go, excuse me, government, knock, 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 I'm sorry. I committed tax fraud the first time, so now I want you, that doesn't work. Okay? So number 1, it's fraud. Number 2, you're going to get nailed with capital gains taxes because more than likely you're not going to find somebody foolish enough as you were to do that. Okay? So be sure you list the property at the full purchase price. There is one caveat to that, all right? And that is that a lot of these properties that you see being purchased are being sold with all of their furnishings. And you as a buyer have no obligation to pay acquisition. You know, we talked about some of those closing costs, okay, the 6 to 8%. Some of those are acquisition taxes and things that are here in Mexico, which, by the way, are also deductions when you go to sell against any capital gains tax you would owe. So a lot of that money ends up coming back to you, and of the closing costs, a lot of that comes back to you as a deduction when you sell. But you don't have an obligation to pay taxes on used furniture. So if you have a property that sells for $250,000 fully furnished, within the offer there'll be some clause that says $20,000, I'm using that as an example, $20,000 of this price is designated toward the purchase of the existing contents. Okay? And so really in that example what would happen is if the property is $250,000 fully furnished but $20,000 is being designated for contents, then $230,000 would be the reported purchase price for the property. Again, that's not a loophole. It's not, illegal. It's a completely legitimate practice because really you don't need to pay. What you're actually buying is you're buying a home and you're buying the furniture. It's actually two separate transactions, and one is taxable and one isn't. Okay? So that's the only caveat to that. Other than that, report it at the full purchase price. Number 8, be very diligent if you're considering a pre-sale purchase. A pre-sale purchase is when you're purchasing something that maybe is under construction, or the construction's been completed but the titles aren't ready yet because those titles are still in process. Okay, so maybe a big condominium complex has been completed and they've submitted all the paperwork to the public registry so that they can divide that one piece of land into the however many titles are there, but it's in process. Anything that you purchase before the title is ready is considered a pre-sale purchase. In Mexico, there aren't the type of consumer protection laws that exist like they do elsewhere. And so you have to be your own consumer protection. And my best recommendation is that if you are considering a pre-sale purchase, you hire an attorney to represent you on your behalf that will comb through and dot every I and cross every T in that pre-sale contract. Okay? It's important. I think there are certainly good deals to be had in pre-sale, but there's some risk there and you need to cover yourself. Number 9, this is just more an FYI, closing takes approximately, and here we go, 60 to 90 days to complete. Again, be aware of information you find online because some of it is outdated. That would be one of them. I wrote this in the end of January. I can now tell you that the closings now take about 60 days to complete, 30 to 60. Instead of 60 to 90, it's now 30 to 60. That is because the permit process for these bank trusts has went automated and online, and it's much faster. So we're not waiting as long to close. You can probably correct that to 30, 60 days to complete. The other thing that you want to know is that you have to be physically present at closing. That's not always the case in the U.S. or Canada, but here in Mexico it's a little bit old-fashioned in that you have to be sitting at the closing table. So you need to make arrangements to come back down. The only way you don't have to do that is if you appoint a legal power of attorney here in Mexico to represent you on your behalf, okay? And that process can be done here in Mexico. It's easier. Or it can be done in your home country. It's a little bit more complex, but it can be done. So either yourself or your legal power of attorney is going to have to be here on closing day. The other thing, number 10, is use a qualified realtor, and don't be afraid to ask them questions. We'll talk a little bit more in a bit about what a qualified realtor is, but please don't be afraid to ask them questions. That's what they're there for. Okay, so you've bought your place. You know what investment potential Mexico has. Now you're ready to buy. Now you've bought. What are your costs of ownership? All right, I can give you sort of your annual costs here. Your bank trust is between $450 and $650 a year. It varies by the bank that you choose. Your property taxes. If you are in the county of Benito Juarez, as is Puerto Morelos and Cancun, your property taxes on developed residential property are 0.26%. Okay? Now, you even get a discount on this ridiculously low rate if you pay it early. But this year it was 15%. So in other words, my 2013 taxes I paid in December of 2012. I prepaid, and I got a discount of 15%. Okay, so it's even less expensive. If you own a property that is directly beachfront, in other words, if your frontage of your property is directly on the beach, not on the beach access, not oceanside, but directly beachfront, if you have beachfront meters, then you do have a beach tax, and it's assessed by the number of meters of beachfront that you have. Typical houses pay around $1,000. Some pay up to $1,500, depends on the size of the lot, for the beach tax. Then if you have a condo, you're going to have some maintenance fees, your property insurance payments, and your utilities. Those are going to be your costs of ownership. What is a notary? This is important. A notary is a notario in Spanish. And so when we use the word notary in English, we're using the literal translation of the Spanish word, which is notario. But other than the word, which is a literal translation, a notary in Mexico is nothing like we know a notary to be in the U.S. or Canada. Okay? A notary in Mexico is a licensed Mexican attorney who has authorized the government to oversee various transactions, including the buy-sell of properties in Mexico. He is the one person that has to be involved in the sale. Okay? You have to have a notary involved in the sale of a property here in Mexico. It's important to note that he is a neutral third party. He's not there to represent one party or the other. He is there as a neutral third party to create the buy-sell agreement and make sure that agreement meets the legal Mexican requirements of a Mexican contract. He ensures the legality of the transaction. He performs the title search for the property to make sure that there are no liens that exist on the property, et cetera, that the paperwork is proper. He does all the due diligence on the title, make sure the title is free and clear and ready for transfer prior to the transfer. He also pays all the taxes and fees that are owed by each party at the time of sale to the various government municipal offices. Now, we were talking about title insurance. Why typically in the Mexican system people never purchase title insurance, why there was never a need for it, is because the notaries themselves are insured. Their work is insured. So if you buy a property and the property indeed wasn't free and clear of any liens, you could go back on that notary's office for that. Now, I've never heard of that happening. Notaries are very, very careful to make sure that they are doing their proper title searches. But in essence, the notary does that due diligence, which back in the States we don't do. We just go ahead and grab a title insurance policy to cover us on. Okay? So I don't mean to discourage you from title insurance, but I also want to clearly explain why, it wasn't a necessary requirement here. Okay? Now, some people do choose to hire attorneys to represent them on their behalf in this transaction that's going to occur in the notary's office, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea, but they are not required. What is required is a notary. How long can you stay? All right, now that you have this house, or you're committed to investing, you don't need a special visa. Okay, come on down. I don't think they ever do a great enough job of telling you what that little slip of paper is, but if you come down to Mexico on an airplane, they give you this, you fill out this piece of paper, they rip off the top half, they give you the bottom half, they stick it in your passport, and they send it on your way. What they don't tell you is that little slip of paper is your tourist visa that allows you to be legally in this country while you're here. And I don't think they ever put enough importance on that, because people would probably take better care of them than what they do. But that is your tourist visa, and that tourist visa can allow you to stay up to 180 days. Now, it'll allow you to stay for however long you put on it, and it can be extended. You just have to go back to an immigration office. So just as an FYI, if you're ever here for 2 weeks and you decide to stay an additional month because you love it so much, head over to the immigration office, take that little tourist visa with you. They'll extend it. It can be extended for up to 180 continuous days before you have to leave the country. Okay? So when you buy a house, you are able to come down and sign on properties. You're able to own a house on a tourist visa. You don't need any other type of special visa. Now, there are long-term visas that are available. Okay, there are a couple reasons why you would want to get one. One is that it allows you to stay indefinitely. So if you're not going to stay, if you plan to stay more than 180 consecutive days without leaving, then you're going to need a long-term visa. The other thing is that if you plan on having a vehicle in the country, because you're either going to buy one here or you're importing one, you're bringing one down, you're going to need a long-term visa for that vehicle. Okay? Now, a moment about vehicles. If you are thinking about having a vehicle in Mexico, my strong recommendation is that you purchase one here. Bringing a vehicle into Mexico is a hassle. It used to be done a lot more often because they used to have a licensing tax in Mexico that was pretty expensive for nice vehicles, and they've done away with that tax. So now there is really no reason why you shouldn't just buy a vehicle here. Long story short, save yourself the hassle. Buy one here. If you do have that visa, if you are a golfer, it will certainly save you money in golf. Rather than paying $100 a round, it goes down to about $25 a round for locals. And the other thing is that you can use that visa in lots of the tourist places and restaurants for local discounts. So if you want to go to Xcaret for the day, they have a local rate. Any of those big attractions have locals rates. A lot of the big restaurants in the hotel zones have locals rates. You just have to show that visa. So it does come in handy, but it's not required. And the only time it would be required, again, is if you want to stay more than 180 consecutive days or you want to have a vehicle. Can you work in Mexico? If you're thinking about working in Mexico, you've got two options, okay? One is to open your own Mexican corporation, as I did with Mayan Riviera Companies. I opened up my own Mexican corporation, and I solicited a work visa, which authorizes me to operate my own company. Okay, that's one option. excuse me, the other option is to go and work for a Mexican corporation, go work for somebody else, okay? Now, if you're going to do that, the process is that you have to receive a job offer from a Mexican employer, okay? So it's a little bit of like putting the cart before the horse. You can't come down here, solicit a work visa, and then go find work. What you have to do is you have to have a Mexican employer willing to hire you, and they're going to write a letter that says, I'm willing to hire Amber Pierce Schultz to do the following work for the following pay. And you take that letter and a little bit of their paperwork to your consulate, your Mexican consulate within your home country. And every province of Canada and every state in the U.S. that I know of has one. You take it to your consulate and you say, I'm ready to work in Mexico. Here's my waiting job. Here's their information. And that's how you start the process for a work visa. That has just changed. It used to be that you could come down and do it all here, and you can no longer do that. To start the process, you have to do it through the Mexican consulate in your home country. So that's an important change. It's new and one that you need to know if you're thinking about working here. The other caveat is that the employer needs to demonstrate that they cannot fill the position with an average Mexican employee. Okay? So if you want to come down and you want to be, say, a waitress, you're going to have a hard time filling that position. Okay? The employer's going to have a pretty long stretch to say that they couldn't hire an average Mexican employee to do that job. All right? But if it's a more skilled labor, if you're a yoga instructor, if you have some sort of technical certificate, whether it's a dive instructor or a massage therapist or some sort of a degree or whatever, that obviously will entitle you to be more than an average Mexican employee's capabilities, and you should have no problem receiving your visa. If you are thinking about opening a Mexican corporation, just like anywhere else, it is imperative that you have a good accountant and a good attorney. And my best recommendation is to go to other successful businesses, and I say successful because do not go to the bar and ask people who they use. Go to several successful businesses in your area and find out who they use, because if they are successful, it's probably they're not doing it alone. They're doing it with good staff, and they know. So find recommendations from other successful businesses in your area. Medical services. Lots of people ask me about the medical services and what medical services are like in Mexico, because they're thinking about retiring, and we would all need good medical services, particularly if you are a senior. So I'm going to tell you that Cancun has state-of-the-art medical facilities that are very, 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 very good. Okay, we've had kids that have gone to the emergency room, and we've had broken arms, and I've had surgeries, and I've had clients that have had, up to hip replacements here, and those operations things have went very, very well. Okay, I'm not going to say that that is representative of the entire country. Certainly there are parts of rural Mexico who probably do not have state-of-the-art medical facilities, okay? But at least here in the Cancun area, I can say that our medical facilities are absolutely excellent. Very important. If you are on Medicare, which is the senior health insurance programs in the U.S., or if you have Canadian health care, the standard plans do not insure you outside of your home country. So if you are ever traveling outside of your home country, you have to have a supplement or a rider that will give you coverage outside of your home country, and it is imperative, okay, because accidents do happen, all right, not just, obviously, God forbid you could be in a car accident or anything. Accidents do happen. Make sure that you have travel coverage if you're traveling abroad. Okay, a lot of people don't think about that because now it's so easy just to hop on a plane and in a couple of hours you're here. But if you, especially if you have government insurances, be sure that you have a rider, and it never hurts if you have private insurance to call and check. Make sure and see what kind of coverages you do have. If you are thinking about living here full-time, there are great Mexican insurances available. My husband and I actually have insurance designed for expats that live outside of their home country. We have an excellent, excellent plan, and I'd be happy to share that information with you, but just so that you know, they are available. Last little bit is about selecting a real estate agent. Things are changing. Our industry is changing. They are going to start requiring licenses, but a lot of people are surprised to learn that having a license to sell real estate in Mexico is not a requirement yet. So every taxi driver, tour guide, and plant, taco, and tamale salesman will try to sell you real estate. Of course, I always, fully acknowledge that, of course, I'm a real estate agent, so of course I'm going to tell you this. But really, you're making a big investment. You need good advice. Go find a reputable realtor to help you, okay? How do I find a reputable realtor? My best suggestion is you look for an AMPI realtor. At this point, since there's no license required, it's optional. I have a license, but it's an optional thing at this point. Look for at least a realtor who's a member of AMPI. AMPI is our National Association of Realtors, and if they're paying their dues, they are having to adhere to a code of ethics, they are peer reviewed, and they get continuing ed. Okay, so those are people that are pretty serious as far as a career in real estate, and so that is my best suggestion to you in order to find a realtor. In order to contact me, if you would like to see our vacation rental listings or our sale listings, you're happy to visit. I'm happy to invite you to visit our website. You can see it there, MayanRivieraProperties.com. If you're interested about Puerto Morelos, or people say, can we join a mailing list? I always tell them you need to subscribe to our blog, which is www.puertomorelosblog.com. I write this blog. Every new listing goes on it, okay? So if you're following it from a real estate perspective, every new listing we have goes on that blog. I also post town events and information about living in Mexico. I've been writing it for a very long time. Please feel free to go there and look through the archives. There's really, really good information there. And then you also have my, my email address. You're welcome to email me, okay? With that, I'm going to open the floor to questions. But before I do, I want to really thank you for attending, okay? And if you will do me the favor, because word of mouth is always the best, if you've enjoyed it, please share it with your friends. We're going to continue to do this, so please, please, please share the workshop with your friends. Let them know that we're doing them and invite them to join us. And with that, I'm going to open up the floor for questions. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look through this chat box just to see if any of you have left me some messages, and I think you have. So I'll address these first. One is, can you telecommute to company in USA while you're in Mexico? And the answer is yes. I have lots and lots of clients who move abroad and who work from online. You can have excellent internet communications here. I'm communicating with you right now over the local cable company's line. Mine is just the 5 megabyte contract, but you can have designated ISPs. You can have the really super fast contracts if you have lots of data that needs to go back and forth. So yes, you absolutely can. And if you are working and you are being paid by a foreign company, not a Mexican corporation, if your paycheck is coming from a foreign country, you do not need a work visa to be here. The only thing that you would need if you're going to be here long term is you would get the non-working visa. Non-working because you're not working for a Mexican corporation. You're just going to show that you can support yourself while you're here from the funds you're receiving from your company in the U.S. or in Canada. Okay? I hope that's answered your question. If you have any other follow-ups, please let me know. And Jay, I think I answered your question. How does it work if you live in Mexico but all your income is from clients in the States? Again, if your income is from clients in the U.S., then you're going to apply, if you need a visa while you're here, then because you're going to be here more than 180 consecutive days or because you're going to have a vehicle, you're going to apply for the non-working visa. Non-working because you're not going to be working for a Mexican corporation. You just have to demonstrate that you have income that can support you while you're here, okay? And the income requirements are minimal. That shouldn't be a concern. But if you are going to work for Mexican corporations while you're here, or you're going to sort of, start your own business and have local clientele, then you would want to either open your own corporation or be paid from a Mexican corporation. Then you would need some of those work visas, okay? Because there are both options for those visas, both working and non-working. Somebody's coming to Puerto Morelos next month to look at properties. What's required to put in an offer should you find something? Offers are pretty simple. Offers are going to read, the basic legal description for the properties. They're going to name both parties, buyer and seller, that they're both in agreement to purchase the property. It's going to settle on a purchase price. Maybe that, the offer goes in and it gets countered, et cetera, et cetera. You guys are going to settle on a purchase price. It's going to say how much is being designated toward contents, and if there's any special terms or conditions leading up to the sale. The offer process is fairly simple and straightforward. And generally what happens is once, each situation is a little bit different, but the typical transaction says, okay, we've reached an agreement on price and terms. The seller agrees to take the property off the market, and buyer, you have a few business days in order to make your good faith deposit and get the transaction rolling. And that good faith deposit, again, I would recommend it be placed into an escrow, but if you're not going to do an escrow, it would be placed into a deposit with the seller. And then you're off and running, and again, it takes about 30 to 60 days to close. Somebody's asked, how do other utility costs compare to the U.S.? Okay, utility costs. Your gas is very inexpensive. All right, your water is very inexpensive. Most properties are paying between $5 and $10 a year for water. And the other thing that, the one thing that you might probably pay more for than what you're paying in the U.S. and Canada is electricity. Let me explain quickly how electricity works. Number one, if you want an in-depth description of this, go to the blog and look up CFE. Search C is in cat, F is in Frank, E is in elephant. CFE is our electrical company, and I've written a really long article about electric bills and how to read them and what you get charged for. But in short, you get 400 kilowatt hours per month on average as a rolling average over the last 12 months. So they keep recalculating this thing every month, right? You get 400 kilowatt hours a month in this rolling average. And if you stay under that on average, then as far as kilowatt usage goes, then you receive a government subsidy on your electrical bill, okay? And that government subsidy pays basically about half of your bill, and your bill stays very, very reasonable. If you go over 400 kilowatt hours per month on average, then you get put into the high consumption category, and those high consumers lose their subsidy. And so your bill automatically doubles because you've lost your subsidy, okay? And the other thing is that when you're not a high consumer, they stage your electrical consumption so that the first X amount of kilowatts are so much per kilowatt hour, and then the next part are charged just a little bit more, and the next part are charged a little bit more. When you're a high consumer, you just get a fixed the higher rate, and it's just a fixed rate, so you don't get the break on that either. Important things to consider. If you're going to be here year-round, or you're going to be running that property year-round, then you're probably, if you have a private house and you're running pool equipment and things, you might go into DAC, this high consumption, because your rolling average might go over that. If you're going to be here in the wintertime and you're not going to crank your ACs, because really you don't need to in the wintertime, if you're not going to be a high consumer, what really puts you over the edge are a lot of times our pool equipment and air conditioning. If you're conservative with your AC use, and with all the LED lights and things that are out, if you're only here in the summer, if you're only here for a few winter months and then you close the place down and leave, your rolling average is probably going to be under 400 kilowatt hours, so your bill remains quite reasonable. So the electricity is kind of really up to how much how judicious you are in its use. It's a long explanation, but I hope that that answers your question. Anne, I always appreciate it. I'm happy to give all the information. She mentions thank you for giving so much important information. You're very welcome. This is the part of the job that I really enjoy, is educating people. I want to make investing in Mexico a little bit more understandable, and not so daunting, because it really isn't that complicated of a process. But I think hearing sort of lots of different noise about the issue kind of tends to make the issue more complicated, but it's usually pretty straightforward. But I absolutely, you're very welcome. Let's see, just continuing to scroll down. Deposit. Somebody asked about deposit. I think when they're talking about deposit, that would be that earnest money deposit for the offer. Oftentimes, it really depends on the property, and it depends on the offer, and it depends on if it's going into escrow, okay? Just like any other place, if you're offering on a property, a big down payment is never a bad thing. A seller loves to see that. If you're putting it into escrow, go ahead and throw a big deposit in, because all that money is going to come back to you if for some reason the title isn't clear, okay? Which, for the record, I've never had a title not be clear, just so you know. But if it's going into escrow, it's not a big deal, and it's, it can be a way for your offer to stand out from the crowd. Hey, look, he's putting a big amount down. He's a serious buyer. He wants to close. Here we go. Okay. A minimum amount is usually about $10,000 at minimum. Again, that earnest money would go in, preferably to an escrow account, or get transferred to the seller with a promise to return it if anything shouldn't, obviously all monies get returned to the buyer if the title would not be transferable. But that would be at minimum about $10,000. But certainly we deal with deposits that are larger than that. Somebody asks about insurance costs. I mentioned that you do need insurance. Insurance costs vary a lot. It depends on what you decide to insure, so really you would need to check with your agent on that. They, just like at home, insurance costs can vary depending on what your premiums are. Is solar available here? It sure is. Mexico, I think, is more forward in the alternative energy sources than I think we are in the U.S. or Canada. There's lots of houses here that are off the grid, not by choice, but because they're just located in places on these beaches that they don't get power to. So there's lots of wind power and solar and things like that, and they certainly are available. If you have those type of equipment, it's important that you have the ability to store them in the off season. You don't want storm season to come through and rip your brand new solar panels off of your roof if you're not here. So you certainly want to be able to store those inside. But yep, absolutely, it's available. Cable and TV. Cable and TV is here, but if it's cable, you're going to get Mexican cable. So if you speak Spanish, that's great. If you don't, there are some English channels, but that is it is available. And internet and TV costs, I would check, look at sky.com.mx. That's a satellite TV. If you're interested in internet costs, I would check Cable Mas, and I'll type it in here. Cablemas.com. I believe it's .mx. That's the cable company. Telmex.com. I don't think it's .mx. I think it's just telmex.com. If it's not, it's telmex.com.mx. Those are the two major internet service providers, and you can see their plans and rates online. Any other questions that you guys have before we wrap up? Well, again, you have my email. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that you have. And I really want to thank you again for joining us. And if you've enjoyed it and you think it's worthwhile, then I would certainly encourage you to recommend it to other people. Certainly word of mouth always helps, and I appreciate that. So send it over. I just got an email in, is it being recorded? We are going to be recording some of these workshops and putting them online. We haven't yet. Tonight's is being recorded as a test Frankly, I haven't done one yet, so I did record it. I'll look back and see how the audio quality and things are and see if we need to improve it. So I don't know if tonight's will be the one that we end up using, but I did record this one for the first time just to see how it goes. And certainly as soon as we get a good version of it, it will definitely go online. Any other questions? Well, I look forward to meeting all of you. Certainly stop in and say hi at the office if you come into Porto, even if you're not buying. It's all right. I won't hold you to it. Come by and say hi. Again, it'll be either me, myself, Amber, or Kim. Kim does the workshops every Tuesday night in our office. So if you happen to be in town, swing by and catch up with us then. But with that, I will let you go. Have a great night, and hello from Porto.